They cracked open a tomb that had been sealed for nearly 500 years. A tomb holding one of history's most infamous kings. And what the archaeologists found inside wasn't just bones and royal treasures. It was something that rewrote everything we thought we knew about Henry VIII's final days. But here's the twist. Nobody saw coming. The king who terrorized an entire nation, who beheaded two of his wives and tore apart the Catholic Church, might have been suffering from something far worse than a bad temper. Keep watching, because what they discovered could explain centuries of royal madness. Let's set the scene. Windsor Castle, St. George's Chapel, February 1547. Henry VIII is dead. Not the vigorous young athlete who once stood 6'2" and impressed Europe with his jousting skills. No, this Henry weighed over 400 pounds, had legs covered in oozing ulcers, and reportedly smelled so bad that courtiers would gag in his presence. Quite a fall from the handsome prince who wrote love poetry and played the lute. But here's where it gets interesting. Henry didn't get a tomb right away. His body was placed in a vault beneath the chapel floor, right next to Jane Seymour, his third wife and the only one he actually seemed to love. Probably because she died before he could get bored of her. The plan was grand. A massive tomb of black marble, gold statues. The works, something that would make the Taj Mahal look like a garden shed. That tomb never got built. His son Edward VI had other priorities, like being Protestant and dying young. In a vault, with Jane, in what was essentially royal Tupperware. For nearly 500 years, that vault remained sealed, until a team of archaeologists got permission to crack it open. Now you're probably thinking they found treasure, right? And far more disturbing, the first thing that hit them was the smell. Even after 5 centuries, the vault reeked not your typical musty old tomb smell. Something else. Something chemical. The lead coffin, because royal corpses get the premium packaging, had corroded in strange patterns. When they carefully opened it, they found Henry's remains in surprisingly good condition. Too good, actually. That's when the real investigation began. They took samples. Bone fragments, hair, even traces of tissue that had somehow survived. And when those samples hit the lab, the results made archaeologists literally drop their clipboards. High levels of lead, astronomical levels, enough lead to poison a small village. But that wasn't the shocking part.
Nope.
The shocking part was where the lead came from. See, everyone assumed that if Henry had lead poisoning, which many historians suspected, it came from the lead makeup his wives wore. Or maybe the lead pipes in the palace. Wrong again. The lead isotope signatures pointed to something nobody expected. Specifically, the sweet wine he guzzled by the gallon. That wine was stored in lid-lined containers and sweetened with lead acetate, which vintners of the time called sugar of lead because it made cheap wine taste expensive. Henry drank this stuff constantly. We're talking gallons per day. A modern bottle of wine contains trace amounts of lead that would get it pulled from shelves. Henry's wine had 300 times that amount per glass for decades. Now here's where this gets absolutely wild. Lead poisoning doesn't just make you sick, it makes you crazy. Paranoid, impulsive, violent. Ring any bells? This is the guy who executed over 70,000 people during his reign. Who killed 2 wives, who went from a Renaissance prince writing theological treatises to a bloated tyrant who couldn't make it through dinner without accusing someone of treason. But wait, there's more. The bone analysis revealed something else. Damage to his femur consistent with chronic osteomyelitis. Henry got knocked off his horse, a horse in full armor. He was unconscious for 2 hours. That kind of head trauma, it changes people. And sure enough, historians have noted that good Henrys pretty much disappeared after 1536. Monster Henrys took his place. So now we've got lead poisoning and traumatic brain injury and chronic infection. That's not a king. That's a walking time bomb in a crown. But the tomb had more secrets. Hidden in a corner of the vault, Archaeologists found something that wasn't supposed to be there. Inside, letters, dozens of them. In Henry's own handwriting, letters he'd written, but never sent. And the contents were absolutely heartbreaking. The son who died in infancy. Letters to Anne Boleyn, written after he'd already ordered her execution, filled with regret and confusion. He couldn't remember why he'd killed her. Literally couldn't remember. There were whole passages where he's trying to piece together what happened. One letter reads, and I'm paraphrasing here because Old English is a headache, "I wake, and you are gone. And I know not by whose order, by whose order." He gave the order. He'd forgotten. Lead poisoning destroys memory. It destroys executive function. The man who split from Rome and created the Church of England might have spent his final years not even understanding what he'd done. The archaeological team found something else. Cloth fragments. Expensive cloth. Embroidered with symbols. When they analyzed the embroidery patterns and cross-referenced them with Tudor records, they realized these were pieces of clothing from each of his 6 wives. Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, Catherine Parr. He'd kept something from each of them, even the ones he killed. Even Anne Boleyn, whose execution he'd watched from a window while eating breakfast. He kept a piece of her sleeve. Whatever Henry VIII was, tyrant. Now let's talk about what this means for history. We've judged Henry VIII as a moral monster. A king who let power and lust corrupt him, absolutely. But what if it wasn't power? What if it was poison? Does that change anything? Does it excuse anything? Here's where it gets philosophically messy. The lead levels they found weren't just high. They were "this should have killed you" high. Which means Henry spent the last 10-15 years of his life essentially being brain damaged by metal poisoning. The Henry who killed Anne Boleyn, different brain chemistry than the Henry who married her. Modern neuroscience would classify this as diminished capacity. The legal system would take it into account. But history doesn't have a not guilty by reason of lead poisoning verdict. The tomb revealed one more thing that nobody talks about enough. When they opened her coffin, carefully, respectfully, they found something strange. Her bones showed signs of poisoning too. Not lead. Mercury. The same mercury used to treat syphilis. Wait. What? Jane Seymour had syphilis? Or did Henry? Both. Here's what probably happened. Henry definitely had syphilis. Multiple historians agree on this. The treatments of the time involved mercury rubs, mercury vapor baths, and mercury tinctures. Eating with him, kissing him, would have absorbed mercury through contact. Secondary poisoning. She died of childbed fever, officially, but her weakened system, poisoned by mercury, couldn't fight the infection. So Henry didn't just kill people intentionally. He was literally toxic. His presence poisoned the people around him. If that's not the most perfect metaphor for Tudor court, I don't know what is. The archaeological team spent months analyzing everything they found, and the conclusion they reached was stunning. Henry VIII's reign of terror wasn't just about power or ego or lust. It was about untreated medical conditions that slowly turned a Renaissance prince into a paranoid, violent, memory-impaired tyrant who couldn't understand why everyone around him kept dying or betraying him. Think about it. Chronic pain from the leg ulcers, lead-induced paranoia, brain damage from the jousting accident, mercury treatments for syphilis that made everything worse. No wonder the guy was impossible. He was suffering constantly. And in the 1500s, the solution to the king is acting crazy wasn't therapy. It was, "Yes, Your Majesty, we'll execute whoever you'd like." Here's something the excavation revealed that didn't make it into most reports. The vault had been opened before, secretly. During the reign of Charles I, 80 years after Henry's death, someone had broken the seal, taken something, and resealed it. What did they take? We'll probably never know. But there are records from Charles I in court of a sacred relic of the great King Henry being used in ceremonies. My money's on a ring, specifically the coronation ring, which was never found in the vault and which historical records say should have been buried with him. Why would Charles steal from Henry VIII's tomb? Legitimacy. The Stuarts were always worried about their claim to the throne. Having Henry's coronation ring would be like holding a piece of royal authority itself. Did Charles III use it at his own coronation? He lost that coronation ring when Parliament beheaded him. Full circle. It's a time capsule of royal dysfunction, medical malpractice, and the terrifying power of untreated mental illness. It's also a reminder that the people we read about in history books weren't characters. They were human beings. Flawed, sick, suffering human beings who happened to have enough power to take everyone down with them. So what's the final takeaway from cracking open Henry VIII's tomb? Maybe it's that monsters aren't born. They're made, sometimes by ambition and cruelty, sometimes by lead acetate and head trauma. Henry VIII was both victim and villain, poisoned by his own excess, damaged by his own recklessness, and empowered by a system that let one sick man's delusions become national policy. The tomb is sealed again now. The samples are in labs. The letters are in archives, and Henry VIII is back to resting next to Jane Seymour, the only wife he never got tired of, probably because she had the good sense to die before he could. Dark? Maybe. But this is Tudor history. Nothing about it was ever going to be cheerful. One last thing, though. The archaeologists who opened the tomb reported something strange. One of them swore they heard a sound. Rattling breath. Like something had been holding it for 500 years and finally let go. Probably just air pressure equalizing. Probably. But if you believe in ghosts, Windsor Castle just released one of history's angriest ones. Sleep tight.